How did I learn Norwegian? I got this question recently quite often, so I wanted to make a video about this. So some people think I'm actually from Norway, but Norwegian is my mother tongue because I speak Norwegian with a northern accent, so they think I'm from the north of Norway, but that's not true. In reality, I'm from the south of Germany, to be more precise, from Bavarian Forest. That's this area that is at the border to the Czech Republic. So I have a bit of a typical, or for Germans at least, a typical story with Norway. When I was a kid, my parents liked Norway very much. They loved the nature and they went there many, many times in the summer for holidays. And for me as a kid, that was super exciting. There's no sea where I live, so we had to take the car ferry overnight, and there were the high mountains and the fjords and the nature just amazing. So I was really fascinated by it as a kid, and I was also intrigued by the language and had this weird idea that I wanted to learn it. Now, of course, as a kid back then, long pre-internet, was pretty difficult, but actually my parents had something that's quite funny. I found it accidentally in my dad's living room recently. So that's a little phrase book, actually. So you have, like, for example, how you can say thank you in Norwegian, different possibilities with translations to German and pronunciation explanations. Not so bad, actually, for its time. And it even had a small grammar section at the end, so you could learn a little bit about adjectives and nouns and gender and sentence structure and so on. Very basic, of course, but yeah, why not? It was better than nothing. But at some point, and I don't remember exactly when that was, I guess during puberty, a bit afterwards, I was a bit nerdy, to be honest, right? I mean, who learns Norwegian in their free time at that age? But I learned English and French at school, and to French back then, I didn't have a personal relationship until I went on a student's exchange there. So I thought, why not actually learn a language that I might actually use one day? So I wanted to study Norwegian a little bit more diligently, and this was long pre-internet and long before YouTube, even before Amazon. So I went to the bookstore in the nearest city, and they had one textbook, Norwegian. That was like a practical textbook Norwegian. It's not practical at all, but it had its good sides, actually, and there is I think they have a much better edition now, but so this is really old, and it was, as I said, it was the only way of learning Norwegian back then. So I studied this pretty diligently, and I also started to listen a little bit to Norwegian, and there was also just one possibility of doing that in the 1990s, and that was actually the Norwegian radio for foreigners. So once a day, I think from 5 to 5:30, there was half an hour of Norwegian on shortwave radio. It was horrible, like the sound quality, of course, unbelievably bad, and it only worked when the weather was appropriate. So when I remember when it was too good, like just sunshine, it didn't work very well. When it was too stormy and rainy, it didn't work either. So when there was like a little bit of clouds, a little bit of rain, that was always perfect, then I could hear it decently. So these were back then, as I said, the only sources actually for learning the language for me, and that's a bit sad. But during holidays to Norway, I went when I had reached like A2 level roughly. I went to a bookstore and I bought this here, Lær meg norsk. This was really good. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. The company went bankrupt, or I don't know, or was sold or went out of business. Anyway, it was really good. It was it's entirely in Norwegian. Very well structured. The explanations given in simple language, so even if your Norwegian is not good, you can understand. And they also focused a lot on listening comprehension and pronunciation. So that was quite amazing, because I think still today in my Norwegian courses super important, and most Norwegian courses don't do very much about it. But they had this, look here. If you're a little bit younger, go ask your grandparents what that is and how it works. But that's how I learned the language to okay-ish level. I don't know, maybe A2, something like that. And back then, of course, I had no idea that one day I would live in Norway. I had been once in Tromsø with my parents. That was in 1993. I was 12 years old. So we did a guided tour in the city, and the city guide said that Tromsø has the northernmost university in the world. And for me as a kid, that was fascinating, and I thought, that might be really, really interesting to study here. And of course, I didn't think of any preconditions or consequences, how that would work. It was just a weird childhood dream that I had long forgotten until I graduated from high school. And then I studied pharmacy, actually. So you see, I did something completely different before publishing language courses. But when you study pharmacy, you have to learn how to make all the different, like how to make an ointment and how to make pills and all of this. You have to learn it in the study. You also have to learn how to make suppositoria. And that's a very boring thing because this mass that the suppositoria are made of, it has to reach a certain temperature, and when it's too cold you can't process it. When it's too warm it goes bad. So basically you're just sitting there all afternoon and waiting for it to get warm gradually. And funny enough, I wasn't even supposed to take this course on that day. I think I had a doctor's appointment or something, so I couldn't do it with my regular teacher. I had to go another day and do it with another teacher because they had like 3 groups or something. So I went with this other teacher, and as I said, you're just waiting for the thing there to I think it's cocoa butter, to warm up, and then you just sit there and talk. And what did we talk about? Well, we talked about her PhD, which she had done in Tromsø, of all places. And the next morning, I had a lecture with her professor, and the professor said that it would actually be a great idea to study abroad for 1 or 2 semesters. So if we wanted to do that, he would like to support us. And that's when something clicked in my head. I was like, does she maybe still have contact to people in Tromsø? So I went back to her office and talked to her, and yes, she did have contacts. And half a year later, I was ready to go to Tromsø. First to exchange semester, and then I studied there longer. But at the beginning, it was just planned for 1 semester. But anyway, now my project of learning Norwegian became suddenly really, really serious because they didn't have much like formal requirements. They didn't ask me to pass a certain language test or something like that, which was also difficult because in my city there was no Norwegian course, not at the university, not anywhere else. So the only thing they told me was, well, your Norwegian has to be good enough so you can follow the lectures, so you can write exams and all of that. And I was like, yeah, okay, so how am I going to do that? Fortunately, there were a couple of exchange students from Norway in the city, and I managed to find one exchange student who spoke really well German, but she wanted to be even better. And we met once or twice per week for an hour or so, and then we would talk half an hour exclusively in German, half an hour exclusively in Norwegian. And that helped me a lot because through all these years of self-study, of course, I got good in grammar, I had a decent vocabulary, all of that was nice. But of course, I was not used to speaking Norwegian or to understand spoken Norwegian, to having a conversation. So when I arrived in Norway, I had maybe B1 level or something like that, and that was really, really good. And if you're planning to go to Norway to study, to work, or for your retirement or something like that, that's something I would really recommend. Learn the basics before you go, because if you're good enough for that level that you can have a basic conversation in Norwegian, then it won't happen so often that Norwegians shift back to English. You will learn the language on arrival much, much faster than if you start from a very low level when you're in Norway. So anyway, when I arrived there, I was quite lucky because usually they put the foreign students in one student house where they're all together, and then you're stuck in this expat bubble with other Germans or people from other countries. Super interesting, of course, but you don't use your Norwegian, right? So I wanted to practice my Norwegian, and I was a bit fortunate because I ended up in a student housing where I shared a flat with 3 other students, and they were all from the north of Norway, from Finnsnes, that's a small place between Vesterålen and Tromsø, from Lofoten Islands, and from Narvik, these 3 places. And so I had the opportunity to use Norwegian all day long. Also in my class, I was the only one who was not from Norway. And the only problem there was that everybody was using their dialect. Everybody was speaking in a northern dialect. There was one single student from Oslo in my class, and he used this typical Norwegian sing-song that you hear when you learn Norwegian from scratch, but all the others didn't. So that was a big problem because, you know, in Norway there is no spoken standard. In German we have that. People have different dialects, but when they're asked to speak in a formal situation, they will all speak standard German. It's a little bit like in UK. You have received pronunciation that theoretically people speak in formal situations, but in Norway you don't have that. So a university lecture is given in a dialect. If this professor is from Tromsø, she will give it in Tromsø dialect, and if she's from Stavanger, she will give it in Stavanger dialect. And so I was mostly surrounded, of course, by Tromsø, or northern Norwegian dialect, and also by a few other dialects, but that took me some time to adapt to. And also I decided to actually adapt this dialect for myself. So I wanted to speak with a northern accent. Why? Because as I said before, I had zero role models for learning another accent, for learning Oslo accent, for example, or Bergen accent. So I went to the university library, I got all the books I could gather about Norwegian dialects, read a lot about it, which of course sharpened my understanding of listening exactly to like which phenomena are important and what things I have to adapt to. And I got a lot of feedback from other students and from teachers to know that my Norwegian pronunciation was somehow on par, which is a bit of an advantage, I have to say, with these dialects in Norway, because people have trouble finding out where I actually come from. When I'm in the south, somewhere in Oslo and Bergen, Stavanger, people always think that I come from some weird island near the polar circle that they have never heard of, but in the reality I'm from the south of Germany. So they never guess this, because my accent is, as I said, Northern Norwegian. So that's quite an advantage for you if you want to learn Norwegian, that you might want to adapt an accent or dialect of the region where you're going to live or where you're going to spend most of the time. So let me know, how are you learning Norwegian? I'd be interested to hear about it. Feel free to share it in the comments. And if you're interested in Norwegian language history, then I recommend that you watch this video